crossed by railroads. When cattle had been scattered across the range, it had been necessary to round them up, and that required men. Now that the cattle ranged only within the confines of fenced-in pastures, there was no need for roundups and branding, and thus no need for men like Jeremy Prine. But, even more than the money, the thing that had attracted him had been the name on the telegram. Not the entire name. The Thomas meant nothing to him, but that last name, the name that called up memories of old friendship, of times good and bad, pleasant and disturbing. Bob Stewart. Prine whispered the name to himself as his horse sauntered down the dusty and deserted street. How many times had he thought of that name since those days when the conflict between North and South was still raging? He couldn't even begin to estimate. Bob Stewart had been on his mind many times. It was hard to believe that they had lost track of each other. Men who suffer together through an ordeal like the bloody battle at the Shiloh Church do not often find themselves totally apart ever again. There is a bond that develops in those times, one that is hard to sever. In many ways it had been severed between Prine and Stewart, but not totally. Stewart still occupied Prine's thoughts, though now he didn't know even if he were living or dead. Perhaps now he would find out. The odds that the steward of the telegram was connected in any way with his old Civil War partner were remote, yet it was a possibility. At any rate, he would find out soon. He was here in Dawson just as the telegram had directed, and if there were anyone else in the town, a meeting would be inevitable. Prine's eyes swept the bare street looking for some trace of life, some evidence of the presence of another living human being. There was something ghostly about the place, and it filled him with a vague apprehension. He was not one to become frightened at a shadow, and superstition had never plagued him, but the vast emptiness all around him, combined with the sense of mystery and slight caution which the telegram had placed in him, made him realize how essential alertness was right now. He looked carefully from one side of the street to the other, squinting his eyes slightly to look inside the dark interiors of the boarded, dusty buildings. Was that a hoofbeat he heard behind him? He turned in the saddle, every sense keenly alert. Behind him, a shutter banged in the wind, its echo resounding down the street. Prine let out a low sigh and turned forward again. "Mr. Jeremy Prine, I assume?" The voice surprised him so that his hand dropped instinctively to his sidearm. Immediately his ears ascertained the direction from which the voice had come, and his gaze took in the form of a slender young man who looked back at him from the porch of the deserted hotel just beside him. The fellow had a grin on his face and an almost devilish twinkle in his eye. Prine was struck with the feeling that there was something familiar in the face of the young man, and he looked at him intently. He was posed casually on the roofed porch, leaning against the supporting post with his arms crossed in front of him, and one foot cocked on its toe. He had apparently stepped from the inside of the building just as Prine's attention had been diverted by the loose shutter. He was dressed for riding, but the cut of his clothes was fancy, and even in his dust-coated condition he looked a distinguished young man. His features were well-formed, and his eyes were brown and clear, almost piercing. He remained at his pose only a moment, then pulled himself erect and walked lightly down the steps, his hand extended and his grin unfaded. "Thomas Stewart, Mr. Prine," he said, his voice light and friendly. "I'm the man who sent you the telegram. I can't tell you how pleased I am that you responded. I've heard a lot about you." Prine was somewhat at a loss at how to react to this young fellow's friendliness. Stewart acted as if he had known him for years, though Prine couldn't recall where they might have met. The feeling that the young man's face was familiar continued, though. In spite of himself, Prine felt slightly on the defensive. There was no point in trusting this fellow just yet, this near boy who appeared